Tock, tick tock, loading up, loading up. Make sure that YouTube is working. Progress. Oh, and no, gotta change that. Back in just a minute. Click and zoom and good. It's not showing me the chats from YouTube, which I like to be able to see because sometimes people surprisingly have questions. Okay, well, there we are. Let's get back to Esther then. Okay, so as you can see, we are going to be taking a small deviation from our regular lunch and learn conversation, which is usually about the weekly portia. But this week is also the week leading up into Purim, and I don't feel like I get to talk about Purim in this type of forum enough. So we're going to take our time today and do a little excursion into chapter 1. And we're going to look in particular at the dealings with Vashti, because it is fascinating to see how the Midrash, the analysis of the ancient rabbis, helps us glean more from this section than we might otherwise. While the story of Purim is quite self-explanatory, it is often colored by many people's perceptions, expectations, childhood experiences, and many people don't ever go back and study it as they would study the Torah. Thankfully, as we'll see, we're going to be joined with Esther Rabbah. Esther Rabbah is one of the great classical compilations of Midrashim. And in addition to teaching us more about what's going on beneath the surface of the book of Esther, it is also just a great primer of reminding us how Midrash works. Too often you will hear people use the term Midrash in Jewish context to mean a story, like, oh, there's a Midrash about that. And while it is true that there is much Aggadic Midrash, that is to say, there is much Midrash that is either put into parable form, put into narrative form, or put into philosophy form, there is also halachic Midrash, where they are analyzing verses in order to understand the halachic implications. Of course, those are primarily focused on the Torah. Esther Rabbah does a little bit of a combination. While it sometimes will fill in the blanks with different ideas from different rabbinic figures, always more than one opinion, it is also trying to help us understand and reconcile the underlying emotions within this story, to recognize that this tale is not just a bunch of stuff that happened, but a lot of things that happened to people that are very like us and very like the people who authored the Midrash. That is to say, Jews in the diaspora, Jews in a vulnerable position, and Jews trying to hold on for dear life. That being said, however, I found that there was some interesting little section of Midrash Rabbah that does most of what I wanted to do, but focuses more on the character of Vashti, or more specifically, the aftermath of Vashti's refusal to come. We're going to read through all of chapter 1. But there are many more famous midrashim about Vashti herself and why she didn't come. That she was torturing the Jewish slaves, that she was forced to grow a tail. All of those other midrashim are very interesting and fascinating, and go read them on your own time. But it is the aftermath, of course, which is actually critical for us as the rest of the story. There are many voices, in fact, that ask, why do we have chapter 1 at all? The real story, as far as the Jewish people are concerned, seems to start in chapter 2 with the promotion of Haman. Sorry, not with the promotion of Haman, with the procurement of a replacement for Vashti for a new queen. You could have started at chapter 2 and just had an extra line saying that Ahasuerus had gotten rid of one queen and now he missed her and wanted a new one. And it would feel like the story wasn't missing anything. However, as we'll see through the analysis at the end of this chapter, which is where we'll focus, there is a lot happening in chapter 1 that absolutely is essential for understanding not only the following story, but also understanding what our ancestors felt like when they read this book and they were reflecting on the life that was being led by Esther and Mordecai and the Jews and the Persian Empire, and their life that was being led in the various places of diaspora for our people. Okay, so enough introduction. Let's get down to work. We are going to zip through chapter 1 and get to the end where we will spend the majority of our time. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, that this is Ahasuerus who reigned from Hodu as far as Kush, that's India, Ethiopia, 127 provinces. This is the Persian king at pretty much the height of the Persian Empire. In those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the capital, still a real place, you can go and visit the ruins of Shushan. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his princes and his servants, the military power of Pardas and Madai, Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honor of his excellent majesty many days, namely 180 days. And when these days were fulfilled, the king made a feast for all the people that were present in Shushan, the capital, both for great and small, 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. All right, so we have 180-day long feast, and you probably realize this, but partying and feasting is a huge part of the story of Purim. Most of the major events seem to happen around parties. One of the things that's being established here is that element, both for good and bad. These parties figure prominently. And as such, showing that this was a king that enjoyed banqueting, used banqueting as a political tool, is important for establishing the character of Ahasuerus, which makes his behavior, well, not reasonable, but more understandable in the later chapters. But notice that 180-day national feast has come to an end, and now there is a 7-day extended feast in Shushan itself. And there were hangings of white, of fine cotton, blue, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and pillars of marble. The divans were of gold and silver upon a pavement of alabaster, marble, pearl, and precious stone. All right, this is a rich palace. And they gave them drinks in vessels of gold, the vessels being diverse from one another, and royal wine in abundance according to the king's bounty. And the drinking was according to the law. None did compel, for so the king had appointed to all the officers of his house that they should do according to every man's pleasure. Many different interpretations of this line. This is one of the more common ones, the idea that everybody got to drink just as much as they want, which was a luxury because most of the time people had to watch their drink, not because of drunkenness, but because of cost. But if the king is picking up the bar tab, it's an open bar, then people drink as much as they wanted to. Which of course is going to explain why they make such bad choices in what is about to happen. Other interpretations are that you actually were compelled to drink, that you had a certain measure you were forced to drink as a way of mandated happiness. But let's get down to the meat of our matter. Also Vashti, the queen, made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So Vashti was the queen, and although we know that the king had many wives, and see that reinforced in chapter 2, Vashti was the chief among the queens. The Persian king would always have sort of a primary wife that served in that official capacity. She was not a co-ruler by any stretch of the imagination, but she did have a very important position. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, told you that liquor was going to be important, he commanded Memucan, Bitseta, Harvona, Bigta, and Avgata, Zetar, and Karkas, the 7 chamberlains who served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. So it would not have been unusual for the queen to have been in a relative seclusion, not that she was locked away, but she was not just strolling through the streets of the city all on her own. Persians, like many other ancient cultures, kept women under wraps in many ways, and the queen especially was considered too precious to be gazed upon by the average citizenry under normal circumstances. However, when the king is drunk and he is bragging to people about how beautiful his wife is, then he wants to show her off. And indeed, this is where one of the Midrashim, one of the more famous interpretations, is that when it says that she was commanded to come with the Keter Malchut, with the crown royal, that was the entirety of her wardrobe that she was supposed to be wearing. that the king was actually telling her to show up completely naked, wearing only the crown. And that would, of course, would help understand why she is about to refuse. We turn to verse 12. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore, the king was very wrathful, and his anger burned in him. She says no, he is drunk, and he doesn't like being defied anyway. And of course, he now gets angry. And then we get the most important aspect of his character. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. All right, so he turns to them, to the people that understand the situation, that understand the moment, the feeling of the kingdom. This is Ahasuerus's defining character, is that he will constantly be looking to someone else to tell him what to do. He just made his own decision, bring Vashti, and that didn't go so well. And so now he is falling back to form and actually making decisions entirely based upon the opinions of other people around him. That is, of course, incredibly important, as we will see later on. With he was getting advice from Haman to begin the massacre, to get advice from Haman about how to celebrate Mordecai, to get input from his Esther for about the ordeal that her people were going through, and also the idea to go ahead and hang Haman, which was casually mentioned by one of the other servants. So he is somebody that perhaps too much leans on the advice of whomever he is speaking with. So he turns to these people, and next to him was Karshena, Shatar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memuchan, the 7 princes of Paras and Madai, who saw the king's face and who sat first in the kingdom. So by seeing the king's face, we're talking about these were familiar in his inner court. These were not low-level functionaries that never saw the king. Remembering the Persian emperor was not exactly buddy-buddy with everybody, that there were layers of hierarchy before you even got into his court. These were the 7 that he was most familiar with. What shall we do to the queen? What shall we do to the queen Vashti according to the law? Because she has not performed the bidding of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains. Okay, that is the question. That what does the law say we're supposed to do for Vashti? You'll notice they are trying to operate within a structure of law. Persia, for all of its flaws, and it had many, was not an autocracy in the way that we might think of it in modern terms. This was not North Korea. That is to say, Ahasuerus was still bound by law and precedent, that he couldn't just do whatever he wanted, or rather he could, but it would be burning political capital and face stiff resistance from this enormous empire, which, yes, was for his power, but that also was his vulnerability, because he had to ensure that all of the different provinces would still owe him allegiance and not revolt. So maintaining a sense of law and order, that the king himself would act in a way that would clarify and reinforce what was expected of all the citizenry, was an important Persian ideal. So he does want something that will be lawful in this particular situation. What do you do when the queen says no? What is the answer? Well, verse 16, and Memuchan answered before the king and the princes, meaning he spoke in front of them, not before like in advance, but before as in addressing them. Vashti the queen has not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes and to all the peoples who are in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus. All right, so he is trying to expand the issue here, make the case a bigger one. He is saying it's not just that the queen has done something wrong for you. It is something that she has done wrong to every man in the entire country. Now, what does he mean by that? For the deed of the queen will be made known to all the women, so as to make their husbands contemptible in their eyes. When it shall be reported that the king Ahasuerus commanded Vashti the queen to be brought to him before him, but she came not. So what he is saying is that the other members of the world, for them it was the world of the empire, will have trouble in their households, because women will say, hey, if Vashti doesn't have to obey the king, who's her husband, then I don't have to obey my husband, who's not king. It will mean that husbands have no authority in their households and will not obey any commands, and that they will think less of their husband, that their status will be reduced. And the princesses of Haras and Madai, who have heard of the deed of the queen, shall be telling of it today to all the king's princes. Thus shall there be contempt and wrath in plenty. The princes of Madai we already just met. These are the guys that are counseling. So they are also worried about their own personal standing and their own personal family structures. That not just in the common people will there be problems, but even among the other nobility, there is going to be problems, including us around this table. Hey, if I got to go home and listen to my wife tell me how Vashti got to ignore the king, and that's why she doesn't have to do what I say, then I'm going to be upset. So they are not just trying to cajole Ahasuerus into punishing her for their own sake. They are trying to make sure that he recognizes this as an existential threat to the stability of his kingdom. Might be stretching things a bit far. We'll see as we go forward. So his suggestion, if it please the king, let a royal commandment go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of Paras and Madai, so that it not be altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another who is better than she, who is more worthy than she. So the basic idea is that she will no longer be able to come before the king, which means she is now essentially banished from his presence and will be trapped in the harem for the rest of her life with no contact with the king, which is about the lowest status you can possibly have without being killed. Although there are some who interpret this as meaning she will die. And that a different person will be given this honor. And of course, the idea here is that she better than her, meaning more pliable, more obedient than she is, which is what they think they find in King Esther. But of course, from chapter 2 through the end, we see Esther's transformation from being obedient and pliant to being demanding and royal. But that's outside of today's discussion. And when the king's decree, which he shall make, shall be published throughout all his kingdom, which is great, all the wives shall give honor to their husbands, both to high and low. And the saying pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. For he sent letters into all the king's provinces, and every province according to its writing, and to every people after their language, that every man should bear rule in his own house, and speak according to the language of his people. We're going to look at that in more detail in our commentary through the Midrash. But the basic idea here is that this was sent as a universal declaration across the kingdom that in case anybody was wondering about the law, not the custom, the law is that every man is the king in his own home. And that every man thus has the authority to force his wife to obey his will, as a king has the authority to force the people in the nation to obey his will. Now, you might be thinking, well, that seems perfectly fair and normal. If you are, shame on you, because one, we have to recognize that clearly this was not the law prior to this, regardless of what the custom might have been. And two, as we'll see, this law doesn't actually even make sense. It doesn't make sense logically, and it certainly doesn't make sense socially. But that will be something that we will have to wait for the sages of Midrash to share with us, because I fear sometimes that if I make certain statements, you will merely dismiss it as the ramblings of some modern lefty rabbi. And think of me and my social or political inclinations, whatever you will, and I bet you're wrong on a lot of them. Nonetheless, I want you to understand so much of this discussion is rooted in things that are almost 2,000 years old, and thus not subject to the same criticisms of modern social rivalries. Okay, pause there, and I'm just going to double check if anybody has a question on YouTube. Not seeing anybody tapping away there. Okay, so let's get into our commentary. Oh, I think we can get one tab bigger than that. There we go. All right, so the first question that comes up is, well, how did this feel to the people reading it? As I mentioned, this is one of the text, one of the subtexts that we need to be examining. Well, that wonderful line from verse 15, according to the law, what shall be done to Vashti the queen? Well, Rabbi Yitzchak points out, for a pig according to the law, and for a holy nation not according to the law, but with cruelty. All right, so Rabbi Yitzchak, and as I mentioned, this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring the unadulterated midrash, is because it forces you to hear the phrases in a different way. It forces you to analyze the text, including the text with the sages, in a different way. Obviously, this is not how we would say it in modern English, but I like to imagine that our ancient rabbis were trying to write as though they were putting something on Twitter. They have a limited number of words that they're going to use, and you have to unpack them. So for a pig, who is the pig? Vashti. Vashti was not considered a commendable person in rabbinic teachings. It was understood that she was venal and vain. Let's try that alliteration a little bit better. That she was venal and vain and cruel, and as such, one would not be surprised that she was a terrible person. So they're calling her a pig. But he's pointing out that for her, they were worried about the law, right? What's the law for a person like Vashti who disobeys the king? But you then have to contrast that with what we find with Haman, where he comes up with this decision to obliterate an entire nation of the Persian Empire, the holy nation being referred to here as the Jews. It's not according to the law, but with cruelty. It's like, where in Persian law does it say that you can just murder an entire nation and steal their stuff? That the government can just wipe out an entire community because it doesn't like them? There's no Persian law saying that's okay. But the king made such a law saying it was okay. And this is the contrast that Rabbi Yitzchak is trying to point out. He's also trying to point out the hypocrisy of many of the countries that we have lived in during the long diaspora of the last 2,000 years. That oftentimes they will claim to be countries of law, countries of honor, countries of noble adherence to the rights of all people. But when it comes to the Jews, that kind of falls apart. The French Revolution can, holler, liberty, equality, fraternity, and then say, yeah, but not for the Jews. And that hypocrisy is something that has been noticed for a very, very long time. And then analyzing the second half of the question, to Vashti the queen, all the more so to a queen who is not Vashti. The rabbis understood that Vashti had an esteemed lineage, that she was from the line of Nebuchadnezzar, and as such, there was more honor due to her than there would be to somebody that was not from such royal lineage. And nonetheless, she was treated according to the law in this way, meaning that she was banished from his presence, at least, which would mean that any queen that was not from as distinguished a lineage would receive even the same or worse treatment. That this was about as good as you could possibly hope to get, given her lineage. All right, onward. So again, our quote, Memuchan said before the king and the princes, is it not against the king alone that Vashti the queen has sinned? Rather, it is against all the princes and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of Achashverosh the king. So, question, what did Memuchan see that led him to leap and offer counsel first? All right, so again, you got to learn how to ask questions if you want to read Jewish texts right. So the question that's being asked by the Midrash here is, we had a whole list of people, and Memuchan is the only one we hear from. So does that mean he just spoke first? And how do you have the audacity to do that? It might be an anachronism. How do you have the chutzpah that you're in the council of the king? The king is asking for advice, and you just say, "Oh, I know." that may be fine in a classroom setting, but even in boardrooms in many corporations, there is a very strict pecking order of who gets to speak when and in what order and what type of suggestion can be made. And it seems like Memucan is jumping the gun here. So why did that happen? Well, one can learn from here that the ignorant leap first. As it says in English, fools run in where wise men fear to tread, right? That sometimes the first person who speaks is the idiot, because you shouldn't ascribe this as being quick-witted or bright. It could just be that he wasn't smart enough to recognize that he had a bad idea, or that he was supposed to keep his mouth shut at this particular time. After all, Ahasuerus does come to regret what happened to Vashti. So perhaps Memucan kind of messed up by making this suggestion. But he rushed in nonetheless. However, that is only one interpretation. There are other interpretations as well. Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Hilkiah said in the name of Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, one said, our legal system is like their legal system. And one said, our legal system is not like their legal system. Okay, so they're now doing a comparison. Again, you live among the other nations as part of the diaspora, and it's normal to say, hey, you know, the way we do things and the way they do things, it's either different or the same. Compare and contrast. This is something that I'm struck with all the time in comparing Jewish law with American law and the laws of other countries. And our sages did it too. However, here there is a debate. One side says that the Persian law is very similar to how we handle things, and the other says the Persian law is very different. Okay, so the one who said our legal system is like their legal system, so meaning for the person who has that opinion, what is their justification for that opinion? It is as we learned in Sanhedrin 32a, that's the Talmud, in monetary laws and in matters of ritual impurity, one commences from the greatest judge, meaning that the highest ranking official, the highest ranking judge on a Beit Din, on a court, will give his interpretation of the law first in these types of cases. However, in capital laws, meaning where execution is a possibility, one commences from the side, meaning that you begin with the most junior judge who gives their opinion first. The idea being that for capital crimes, we don't want the junior judges to feel cowed by the opinions of their seniors and not advance their own ideas of why that person might be exonerated. And thus somebody might be executed that had they spoken up, it would have been realized that they were not guilty of a capital crime or had not met the evidentiary requirements for execution. So in the Jewish system, for most types of cases, we begin with the most learned judge and then work our way down. And in capital crimes, we do the opposite, beginning with the most junior. And this is saying that this opinion is being brought by the person who says that our system is the same, that you begin with the most junior and then work your way up. Now, that would imply that Memucan is in fact the dummy, that he is the most junior of the ministers, that because he is the first one to speak, he must be at the bottom of the list, because this is a potentially capital crime, that not coming or not obeying the king's command is the kind of thing that carries with it a death sentence under many, many circumstances. So that would mean that he was a fool, because he's giving this opinion first. He is at the bottom of the list. However, the one who said that our legal system is not like their legal system, what is the significance of Memucan said? So for people who don't think that they follow the same rule as our rule of who gets to speak when in the judge's opinion stating, well, it is comparable to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. It is comparable to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda appears to be correct. Likewise, the statement of Memucan appears to be correct. So Instead, rather than believing that it is being listed in order, and in this case from junior to senior, instead it is simply that this is the opinion that got recorded. We shouldn't assume that this was the only opinion that was shared. We shouldn't assume that it was the first nor the last opinion shared. It's simply, this is the opinion that was shared, that was eventually acted upon. And as such, just like if we said Rabbi Yehuda appears to be correct, it doesn't mean he was a junior or a senior. It just means that at the end of the day, his opinion was the one that carried the day. So too, Memuchan, we shouldn't rank him in any way. We should just say he must have been the one opinion that was agreed upon in the end of their discussion. So, and it tries to imply that there was not a strict system of how people were giving their opinions, but instead they were brainstorming, if you will, and Memuchan happened to be the one that was that advanced an opinion the king liked and that was implemented. Okay, cognizant of our time, yes, okay. Rabbi Yochanan said, there are 3 Amoraim who explain why Memuchan sought to dispose Vashti. So Amoraim, just as a little vocab reminder, we have, of course, the entire time period up till the early rabbis that are mentioned in the Mishnah, that people who are actually mentioned in the Mishnah become what are called Tanaim. And then once the Mishnah is finished, we have the scholars that continue to teach and analyze it, that create what is now known as the Talmud, and those are the Amoraim. So Rabbi Yochanan says there are 3 Amoraim, and they have different opinions about why why Memuchan wanted to get rid of Vashti. One said, because she would slap him, Memuchan, with her slippers on this side and that. So, she was queen, and she pushed the limit of what she could get away with, and she humiliated this other advisor of the king. Another said, because she did not invite his wife to the women's banquet, meaning that Memuchan was sticking up for his wife. And another said, because he had a daughter, and he sought to marry her to royalty, that he was hoping to get rid of Vashti to create an opening that his daughter could be put into, which, always is good for the family. Now, we have proof texts for these. The one who said because she would slap him with her slippers on this side and that, it is, as he said, it is not against the king alone that Vashti has committed an offense. So rather than reading that in a very narrow sense of her refusal to come to the king has also created a problem for the rest of us, instead, the Amora here is saying her insult to the king is not the only bad thing she's done. She's also offended me. She slaps me in the face with her slipper, meaning that she is even worse than you think, your majesty. And perhaps indeed Achashverosh did not know, or perhaps indeed this would exacerbate under these circumstances his anger against her, which would move her to be deposed. And the one who said because she did not invite his wife to the women's banquet, it is as he said, for the queen's deed will go out to all the women, rendering their husbands contemptible in their eyes. Well, if you read that carefully, that indicates that she was not there. Logic, right? If all of the women were there, like the wife of one of the head princes of Paras and Madai would expected to be there, if all of the wives were there, then you don't need to worry about word getting out. You don't have to worry about there being a rumor being spread. They're there. They witnessed it. But if Memuchan's wife was not there, if she had not been invited to the party, which would be the only reason she wasn't there, because if invited, she would have gone because it's important, then we now have at least one person not present to whom the rumor could spread. Right? It's a very strict logical analysis that the text is implying there are people not at the party, because if everyone had been at the party, there would have been no one left for the rumor to reach. And since Memuchan is speaking, it could very well be that his wife wasn't there. And the one who said because he had a daughter and he sought to marry her to royalty, as it is said, and may the king grant her queenship to another who is worthier than she. You can notice that Memuchan, much like I will point out Joseph, is very quick to imply the creation of a new post, of a new opening that maybe the king could find the right person to fill. And Memucan might not be willing to specifically name his daughter as the person who should have that post, but he might be hinting at it rather strongly, and the king is just either failing to take the hint or just doesn't want to marry the guy's daughter. So three all very acceptable readings of why Memucan, what's his motivation behind this, more than just he's worried about how he's going to be treated at home, that he has ulterior motives of either a personal grudge, a personal issue with his family, or a personal hope for his family that are motivating him to come up with this rather harsh, decree. You will note, however, that it takes Ahasuerus a number of years before he finally really seeks a full replacement for Vashti. The events of chapter 2 are not immediate. There is a lag time between this and that by about 7 years, if memory serves. Okay, onward. So, to this day, the ladies of Persia and Madai who have heard of the queen's deeds will tell it to all the king's princes, and there will be no end, kedai, of humiliation and wrath, meaning it's going to cause trouble. How do we interpret this? Rav and Shmuel, Rav said, the humiliation is deserving of his wrath, that it is kedai, it is the appropriate amount. Shmuel said, the wrath is deserving of this humiliation. So, which is it that is kedai? Which is it that is deserving, or the appropriate amount? Well, Rabbi Hanina said, as her father dishonored the temple vessels, the humiliation of Vashti is deserving of the wrath that was its result. That was wrathful towards her and killed her. So, two different ideas here. The second one is the easiest to unpack. Rabbi Hanina is saying that those gold goblets that we were talking about from the party in Shushan, that was actually from the temple treasury. That was actually from the temple loot that had been brought through Vashti from Nebuchadnezzar into Persia at this time. And as such, her end is partly due to the humiliation that came from Nebuchadnezzar's sacking and desecration of the temple. And as such, it's poetic justice. Now, the Rav and Shmuel text is a little bit more tricky to try and unpack. That this idea that there is deserving of wrath, or that it is deserving of humiliation, is basically trying to say that the idea being that if you are going to be that wrathful, then it is no surprise that you will be humiliated. Or if you will be humiliated like that, it is no surprise that there will be anger. It is trying to unpack which is coming first here. Is it that the king's princes will be wrathful, and because of their wrath, they will be humiliated? That is to say, they should be ashamed of their violent behavior? Or should it be that, well, no, they are being humiliated, and it's no surprise that they are going to be angry over that sort of thing? And this is a fundamental tension that continues into the modern day. There are people out there who feel that if your honor has been impugned, that you must be angry and wrathful in retaliation, that you have to challenge a person to a duel sort of mentality. And then there are others, and I will point out the majority of Jewish sources, which say that if you have been humiliated, that does not give you permission to be wrathful. In fact, the true humiliation comes from behaving like a beast, like a monster, like a fool, that allows their anger to dictate their behavior. That is much more humiliating than whatever it is that happened with your wife, disobeying you. That's not where the true humiliation comes from. But such arguments are, as you can see here, well, quite old. Okay. If it please the king, let a royal edict be issued before you, and let it be written in the laws of Persia Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never again enter the presence of the king, Ahasuerus, and may the king grant her queenship to another who is worthier than she. All right. He, Memucan, said to him, meaning to the king, My master the king, let the word emerge from your mouth, and I will bring in her head to you on a platter. Like I mentioned, there are many that say if this is not just a banishment issue, but that this is a execution warrant. The idea being that if it is written and cannot be abrogated, well, the only way that it cannot be abrogated is if she's actually dead. Then there's no chance that it will ever be violated. And the idea that Vashti shall not enter the presence of the king means that she will be gone. And the fact that her queenship will be available to someone else also means that she's gone. Now, that's not the only reading of the text, but that is a possible reading of it. Now, going back to the rest of the verse, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated. Rabbi Hanina, son of Rabbi Abahu, said, it is written, here from Job, for he causes pain and he bandages, he crushes and his hands heal. Meaning that in talking about God, we get a statement of both harm and healing, that God can cause both types of things. And here we have this idea being exemplified. How so? Well, in the language that announced that the kingdom was being taken from her, meaning from Esther's ancestor, as Samuel said to Saul, and was given to another who is worthier than you, from 1 Samuel 15:28. In the same language, the kingdom was returned to him, to Saul, through his descendant Esther. That is what is written, and the king will give her queenship to another who is worthier than she. All right. Now, maybe a little hard to see what the line of commentary is doing here, but you have to remember who Esther is. Esther is from the tribe of Benjamin. She is a Benjaminite. That's, I think, the English version. She is from the tribe of Benjamin. And who else happens to be from the tribe of Benjamin? Saul. King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Now, who did King Saul fail to kill that led to his kingdom being taken and given to one worthier than he, which is the same language that we are seeing here? It was King Agag of the Amalekites. Who is Haman? He is the Agagite. He is a descendant of King Agag. This is the full circle of a history coming round here. King Saul failed to kill the Agagite. Thus, the kingship was taken away from the Benjamites to one worthier than he. And who was the worthier? Well, that was King David. But here, Vashti fails to do as the king asks, and the kingship or the queenship is taken from her and given to one worthier than she. And who is that? It is to Esther, who is the descendant of that Benjamite King Saul, and who will finally wipe out that line of his descendants, Haman. So there is a masterful literary arc that is being run through all of this. But you have to remember a lot of different bits of history and recognize the parallels in the text. And since most of us can't do that spontaneously on our own, we, of course, are very grateful that we have our Chachamim, our sages, to have noticed the similarities of languages and of the characteristic of the characters. Okay. And the matter was pleasing in the eyes of the king, and the princess and the king did as Memucan said, which means he issued a decree and brought her head on a platter. She's dead. All right. Very nice, very short, but let's get to the real meat of the discussion. And that is this whole question of what was actually being ordered for all of the provinces. Remember, all they had to do was say, let Vashti be killed or let Vashti be banished and give her queenship to someone else, and we could have solved all of this issue. Why do we need to tell every man to be the ruler in his house and the language of his people, yada, yada, yada? What's up with all of that, and how does that even work? Well, that's what our Midrash wants to understand. Rav Huna said, Achashverosh had a warped sensibility. The way of the world is that if a man wishes to eat lentils and his wife wishes to eat peas, can he compel her? No, she will do whatever she wants. Moreover, Rabbi Pinchas said he became a laughing stock throughout the world. So we'll get to the other examples of that in just a second, but let's make sure we understand the basic rabbinic idea here is that trying to pretend that the man is supposed to be king in his house is nonsense. Because what man thinks he has the right to order his wife to eat something in particular? I'm eating lentils, and by gum, you're going to eat lentils with me. Don't be a fool. If you want lentils and she wants peas, you can't force her to eat peas. What are you going to do? Hit her? Hold her down and put peas in her mouth? What kind of idiot are you? What kind of monster are you? That's the rabbinic attitude to what Achashverosh is proposing here. Is that it's as though the man is a complete, well, either buffoon, but since he's in a position of power, a monster, that he seems to think that this is the way you rule, that he thinks he can give these orders to everybody in his own right. Could he order everyone to eat lentils in the entire kingdom? And would he be willing to compel them to do so? Now, we do know that a king will do those kinds of things. I mean, after all, we see in the very next chapter that they compel women to show up in Shushan, whether they want to or not, to be taken into the king's harem. That's called kidnapping under any other circumstances, but it's kingly prerogative. The king seems to think that that will also work in each person's house. And the rabbis here are saying, of course it doesn't work like that. You cannot force your wife to eat what you want her to eat. She is still her own person. She is not like, an animal that you will give a particular type of food and beat until it eats. That's just ludicrous. It is sad that so many people seem to still think that that is not ludicrous. But, well, thank God we have our teaching of sages to point out that this is not some new idea that you not compel the member of your household to live in fear of you. But it gets even more illogical when you look at the second half of the order. The way of the world is if a Median man marries a Persian woman, is she to speak the Median language? And if a Persian man marries a Median woman, is she to speak the Persian language? Right? Well, what do you mean, speak the language of his people? Does, like, the king's decree magically give her the... I am sorry for my disturbing phone. Sometimes I forget to hit do not disturb, and that's the day when it decides to send me 100 messages. Okay. Does that mean when you pass an edict that suddenly everybody will have the knowledge of a different language in order to be able to comply? So you tell everybody has to speak the language of their husband. Okay, but I don't speak his language. Well, then I guess you're not going to say anything. I'm sorry, what? I mean, how am I supposed to live in a household where I'm not allowed to speak my language just because I'm now ordered to speak his? Do you think this is making the world better, King Achashverosh? And is this actually going to solve the problems of the disharmony that might come to a household? This is going to exacerbate things. As Rav Huna said, Achashverosh had a warped sensibility. He did not actually understand what would make life better for the people in his country, or his empire. He is making edicts that somebody who sits on a throne might think he can make, but will quickly be ignored or modified by people actually in the kingdom in order to make them usable. But that doesn't work in a house. You try to make a house run like a kingdom, and all you are going to do is create greater strife. So far from trying to resolve the issue of, oh no, Vashti didn't come, there's going to be horrible discord in every household because women won't do what their husbands say, the rabbis are pointing out women don't have to do what he says beyond certain limited things of that have to do with property rights and who owns what. That she doesn't have to. She can speak what she wants to. She can eat what she wants to. You don't get to order people around in your household as though you were a king. And to imagine that somehow that is the ideal, that every man should be a king in his own castle, is simply ludicrous. And when people try to impose that into a family, not only is it barbaric and monstrous, but it is going to create the kind of strife and anger that this edict was supposed to prevent. It is going to cause greater resentment, more rebellion, and absolutely remove any chance of shalom bayit within the household. There will be no harmony within the house. Now, we end with one final little quip that I find very interesting. However, the Holy One, blessed be He, spoke with the people of Israel in the language that they learned. Okay, before we get to the proof text, let me just point out the amazing audacity against the male chauvinism that is being expressed here. So read it like this. Look, you think I'm the man, I'm the head of the household, I'm king within my own home. Therefore, you will eat what I tell you to eat, you will speak what I tell you to speak, and you will only do what I say. You think that you're being high and mighty? Well, you know who's high and mightier than you? God. And did God demand the Israelites do up? Look, when God tried to speak to the Israelites when they had just come out of Egypt, what did he do? He didn't speak to them in his own language. He spoke to them in a language they understood. God was willing to meet them. God was willing to accommodate them. Even though God was, of course, the king, God didn't act like a jerk. God acted like somebody who wanted there to be a good and harmonious relationship, and so used language that the people would understand. And what is the proof of that? This is what is written, I am, Anochi, the Lord your God. That's the word for I am, which is in Exodus 20, also known as the first of the 10 commandments. We've done classes before about the difference between the Jewish 10 commandments and the non-Jewish 10 commandments, and this is number 1. Now, the issue here of Anochi is very, very significant, because Anochi is actually considered by tradition, and I have not been able to confirm this with an Egyptologist, but it is certainly considered by tradition to have been an Egyptian word. The normal word that's used in most of the Hebrew is ani, whereas Anochi is considered to be very, well, archaic. But our tradition assumes that Anochi is actually an Egyptian word, and that this was God's way of trying to speak to the Israelites in a language they might be more familiar with, Egyptian, because after all, they've been living down there for 4 generations, and they may not be speaking the same Hebrew as Abraham had so well, if at all. So by using a familiar language for them, even Egyptian, God was showing exactly how all of us are meant to behave, not as demanding that I be respected as the ruler, but going as every effort, putting every effort, extra mile to try and reach to another person in a way they will understand. That's how you bring harmony and peace into life, not by laws that demand absolute obedience. That's the Persian way, and it stinks. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in their houses. After all, we'll see later on that even Haman is being told what to do by his wife Zeresh, and even Ahasuerus ends up doing exactly what his wife tells him. It is completely flipped from this edict by the time we get to the end. And certainly within the rest of our lives, that is not the way we are meant to act. That is one of the overarching themes of the entire book of Esther, and it would be lost if we didn't have chapter 1. Remember, that was one of the questions we began with, of why are we having chapter 1 at all? Well, without chapter 1, we cannot see how ludicrous this attitude is and how countered it is by the end of the story. That if Esther was to live by this edict, if Esther was to have only done what, the master of the house had said, she never would have gone to the king uninvited. She never would have invited Haman and the king to that party. She never would have exposed Haman to as the plotter that he was, and she never would have ordered the strikes against those that were attacking the Jews, or the appointment of Mordecai to his position. None of the story would have happened except for the destruction of the Jewish people. It was precisely because Esther didn't behave the way chapter 1 says women are supposed to behave that we end up with the holiday of Purim and the continued existence of the Jewish people. So much of this entire story is about seeing Esther break the mold of chapter 1, not in the superficial rebellion of Vashti, but in the true idea of, I will act as an equal, and I will stand before the king and tell him, what needs to be done when I know what needs to be done. And I'm not going to shirk that responsibility just because I'm a woman and because the man is the ruler of the house. So anybody that ever points to chapter 1 as somehow being proof of how the Bible supports male dominance in society is missing out on the entirety of this story. Not to mention, of course, the wisdom of our sages. But we can carry on that conversation another time. Anybody is in town and wants to stop by our Wednesday class when we can talk about anything, the We Need to Talk sessions, you are welcome to bring that up and we can go into it in much greater detail. But for now, this will have to suffice. Hopefully this has whetted your appetite for studying the Book of Esther a little more deeply. And as always, I will promote Safaria, great website, which has so much that's already translated into English. And yes, it still requires a little practice and patience to unpack the rabbinic sayings, but hopefully you'll find it very worthwhile. Take care, everyone, and Purim Sameach. Have a wonderful and happy Purim.